Praise God. I hope all of you can hear me clearly. We have come into the 11th session of this study. We are right now in this series of looking at the wisdom literature, and we have looked at already at Job, and we have looked at Psalms and also Song of Songs. And today we'll be looking at primarily Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, and if we have time, also in the writing of Lamentations. Uh, as we start, can I ask one of us to lead in prayers as we begin the session for today?
Father in heaven, we thank you for this evening that you have given us, Lord. Lord Almighty, thank you for enabling us to come together in this platform to understand the scriptures, to hear from your servant. Help us, Lord, that we may you open our hearts and mind and our eyes towards the hidden truth, hidden treasures which is in the scripture, Lord. Anoint your servant with fresh anointment this day. Help us, Lord, that we may be able to experience and hear the whispers from you, Lord, and we could it will help us to change and transform our life. We as a church, we bless your servant, and we expect, Lord, that your presence will change us as well. Thank you for your grace and mercy that has been throughout all of us in the middle of this pandemic also. Thank you for enabling us once again to gather like this, committing the rest of the time in your hands. We ask all this in the mighty name of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Christy, your voice is very feeble. I don't know whether it is for me alone or...
Even for me, it was pretty faint.
Maybe your mic is too far from you.
Is it better now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. If there is any more troubles, the usual one that I keep this for the study is not working. So if in case you're not able to hear, do just message in the chat, so I will be able to change and check. So we are looking at the writings of Proverbs. And we will primarily look at, so we went through the understanding of what wisdom literature is, and we went through different aspects of it. And some of this I would like to again recollect as we are going to look at the book itself right now. So we understand that about wisdom literature, that this is a book that actually talks about every aspect of faith and life, or in simple ways, we can say a choice of a life that if we want to live according to the way of God, or if we want to live a life according to the way of the world. That sort of a parallelism is clearly existing. And there is always, if you look at in Psalms, and Proverbs and all these wisdom literatures, there's a contrast between an ungodly life and a godly life that we are able to clearly see. So Proverbs is usually a collection of short sayings instructing the reader how to live well. That's a very clear instructional manual sort of a material that we have. And unlike First Samuel or Second Samuel or Esther or Job, the writing of Proverbs is not like a one-time written document. It is probably a collections of various proverbs across time by different people, and it has been compiled in a particular order for us to understand the message of the text. So Proverbs also has to be understood, though there are no wider historical context for this. Like like how we look at First Samuel or Second Samuel, where there is a very particular context. Proverb doesn't run behind a context; it runs more of in like a advice that was fitting in well for their times, as well as it is a well fitting in for our times also. So that in that way, when we look, Proverbs is something that we are also able to understand. However, some aspect of cultural understanding might be needed for us to understand certain things better. However, there is no much of contextual study involved. We have to understand that the book of Proverbs, it's consolidating the ancient Israel's experience-based convictions, and it is offering the believers a general principle or a practical advice on holy living, on how they have to live. So that's a general guideline that we are able to understand. So, what the clear implication or the clear understanding of wisdom literature is Proverbs chapter 3, verse 7, where it has said to fear the Lord and shun the evil. So, it is always about, look, there are two sides that it is shown, and it is asking us to pursue the one that is godly. So we have to understand that proverb. I hope all of us remember those sessions. Proverbs is not a new genre introduced in the Bible. It is an already existing genre. It was well existing in the first century context, and there are many other proverbial material of the first century, of the previous centuries that are available to us. And in fact, many of those, even in the Bible, that we have are there in other documentations. But as we looked at those weeks, the markers of separation is that here they have very clearly indicated the monotheistic faith of Israel. They are very clearly shown. So anything supporting an idol worship, or anything supporting a form of living, a model of living that is not according to the way of the law, the people would definitely change it, and they would make it in a way that it is very clear to the law of the land. So it is a persuasive saying. It is not really some revelation that they have got from somewhere. It is out of their experience, a proven experience that they have, or from the life of their past fathers or forefathers. So they have an experience, and they are putting it in form of a short liner, so that people will be able to understand that and obey that and live. So that is what a proverb simply means. They are collected and related to one another, and also the result is a collection of timeless truths or basic values proven by previous generations. There is always a look back when it comes to proverbs. There are not just, so if Solomon is consolidating, it is not necessarily only authentic to Solomon. It is all authentic to the generations before him, but probably because the compilation technique happened at a later period, or at a period of time, that is one of the reasons why they have these material, why they have or Solomon stands to be the authority of many proverbs, as we claim it to be. In terms of the authorship or the authority behind it, we look at, as we divide the proverbs into different materials, we will be able to look at it. The unifying purpose of the collection is to encourage the reader to live righteously and justly before God. So, as I mentioned there, the agenda is very clear. The agenda is about how the reader, or the ones who are going to get this proverb, will be able to stand rightly and justly before God. Now, these are two important things, the very important things that we have to clearly understand. I was taking the session in a couple of places these days, and a few people were not able to clearly understand it, or they were not able to fully grasp this. I had already mentioned it when we were taking the wisdom literature series. We have to understand that proverbs are not promises. Now, why do I say proverbs are not promises? Because the promises for the people are not given in the writing of proverbs. Proverbs, as we mentioned, it is a saying. It is a general principle of a godly training, of a godly, righteous life. It is not about It's very it is very God-centered. Proverbs are very God-centered. However, it is not that if you do one thing, you're assured that everything will happen as per what is written over there. And also, they are not commands. They are not like how we have it with imperatives or instructions, like what we have in the book of the laws. This is carefully woven documents, carefully put up document, so that they will help us as a guide. So no, there is no new doctrines, no new way of living, no new commandments introduced over here. What is introduced over here is a they are repositioning or retelling what the law is emphasizing. So as we looked at Sam's last session, they are re-emphasizing again about how the person who follows the law is living, how the person who is living according to the way of the Lord is going to be. When we take the verse that we were discussing in the group, and some of you responded in chapter 1, verse 33. Let me read that verse for us. It says, "But whoever listens to me will live in safety and be at ease without fear of harm." Now, if you actually take this verse, it looks really like a promise. It's really attractive in a way of a promise, where it clearly says, "Whoever listens to me will live in safety and be at ease without fear of harm." The question over there is, this particular line doesn't start in verse 33, because the first word of the verse in 33, it is a conjunction. It is a word called "but" that is standing there. So there's and "but" is like a strong contrast between what is told before and what is told after. So what is told before in verse 32, it is about what can destroy them, what will kill them. And what is it? "For the waywardness of the simple will kill them, and the complacency of fools will destroy them." So here the verse is clearly talking about the wicked ways, or the way of the simple, means the way of the world, the way of the how the people of the world who thinks there is no God or godly principles, they are going to be destroyed. They are going to be strictly going to be punished. But on the other side, those who are living as per God's law. Now, listening to me is an imperative, or it's a synonym to what we have in Deuteronomy, where it actually says, "Hear, O Israel." That means you have to hear God's word or hear God's law forward, because that particular strong attribute of "Hear, O Israel, your Lord, our God is one." Now, that is a strong words that has been given to them. But in here it says, "Whoever listens to me." That means these principles that are emphasized in the law will be a guiding mark for the people of Israel to actually live. And now, how to live? They will live in safety. Now, does safety means does it actually means protection from every danger around them? Now, in a Jewish context, in a Old Testament understanding, the blessing, the covenant principle of blessing, is very different from what we have in the New Testament, in the covenant principle that we are part of. Now, for them, it was in an aspect of land, and it was in an aspect of strong, a king like David, and all of those were their mark of measures, or things that will rescue them from their harm. So when we look at these verses, though it look like strong promises, it is two ways of living. It is showing us, on one side, if you are going to be a wicked person who says there is no God, you're going to eventually be destroyed and you're going to die. But if you are going to be that person who is listening to God, who is listening to the ways of God, who is going to listen to the generational principles that the Jewish customary, as per the law, what they have followed, they will live in safety. Just like how Psalms 1 is emphasized over here. It is not about a materialistic point of view, but is more from the aspect of guidance of their life. It's a guard of their life. They will not be falling into the hands of destruction from God. So what do we understand here is that though it is not a promise, though it is not a command, it is a very clear manual or a very clear guidance system of life. It is showing us in some ways what is right and wrong. It is showing us who is the wisest person. It is showing us as children of God how we should be able to live in our custom. So these are some of the things that are emphasized in the book of Proverbs. I remember I told this verse last time when we discussed on Western literature, where in Proverbs chapter 22 verse 6 it says, train children in the right way, and when old they will not stray. Now, though this is looks like a promise. Why? Because the second half said, if even if when they are old, they will not while away or they will not stray. However, this is not really about a promise that are told that every children that are brought up in a godly way is going to be there. But what is this more telling is, there is it's a general principle that a godly training will help the children to continue living that righteous life from that they have shown in their families throughout their life. So that is what is being emphasized over here. So always when we read Proverbs, make sure that we are reading it in huge chunks and not just verses, and also understand that they are not promises or commands, but general basic instructional of life. Or it shows us, it pushes us, or it helps us in simple terms to live our life as per what God has told us. Yep. Same thing what I mentioned, the general principles of life. Now, because of their style of writing, they shouldn't be read quickly. They shouldn't be just ran over and read, but they should be carefully read. The reason is because, as I mentioned, the language is not that easy, though it sounds very easy for us to understand sometimes. So if you're going to literally translate everything, we might be wondering, is it really talking about now, even if we take an example of a proverb that we have in our culture, or that we generally use, right? If you're going to take literary meaning out of it, we might miss it, right? Apple a day, doctor keeps a doctor away. If we're going to keep it literally now, are we talking about doctor here? Are we talking about apple here? Are we talking, what are we talking over here? It is in a way talking not about doctor and about apple. It is much more talking about the careful care that a person has to give by eating healthy food, or that might be an advice, or a stitch in time saves nine. It is not talking about a tailor's responsibility. It is not talking about the number 9, but it is more talking about orderliness, or a way of living. So that's the way we have to understand. So a quick reading might not really help us, but a careful reading, a condensed, because it is made up of a condensed language, we have to read them slowly and try to understand the meaning that it is trying to give. Their general quality also means that you should always be looking for the underlying principle of the statement. So as I mentioned, do not look for words and play around with the words that is over there, but look for the meaning that these words are trying to dictate from over there. This also we had looked at. There are two types of wisdom literature. One is discursive. That means they are usually very pessimistic about life, and the other is instructional or didactic. That means they are teaching oriented and they are very optimistic about life. And this is very well seen in the book of Proverbs. When we look at it, we are able to see this material. Now, there's two ways of living. Now, this also most of us are familiar of, right? The two ways of living, right? On one side, those who keep the law, and one side, those who reject the law. It's about covenant faithfulness again, just like how we have been looking at the Old Testament until now. Every particular point is about the covenant faithfulness between God and his people. So here also, that picture is painted very clearly. because here also they talk about the men and women who walk in the ways of God, or as per God's law in the covenant of God, and those who refuse and keep his covenant. So try to understand it again from that perspective, where there is the people who are trying to reject God as not part of the covenant, and those who are in the covenant who are trying to keep God's law. And then it is also important to understand that Proverbs designates these individuals as fools and their life choices as folly. Now, these are literally talking about those people who reject God and refuse to keep the covenant of God. Such people are I mean, so on one side, in a cultural way, when you look at it, they might be the wisest person in the world. There might be people who have gained the best favor in the whole world. There might be maybe a person like Solomon, might be very successful in administrative skill, must be very skilled in terms of gaining favor from all the kingdoms, but he is actually living the life of a wise fool, right? Because he has wisdom, but he is not able to apply those into his life. His instructionals or his what he is bringing out has meaning, or he is flourishing in his every aspect of life, but on one side he stands to be a fool because he is rejecting the principles that are very clearly defined in the law, where he is sacrificing or he is raising up temples in the land and all of those things which are actually countering the law, which actually make him the wisest fool, as we can call him. So just like that, on one side we might have people who are wise and who looks to be wise and who looks to be flourishing, but they are not necessarily wise as per what the law dictates. Those who carefully maintain the relation with God and adhere to his ways are called wise, and their lives are characterized by wisdom. So the wise in the book of Proverbs, it is not necessarily about marks. It is not necessarily about getting 100% in your school report cards. It is not 100% about knowing everything in the world. But the wise in the book of Proverbs, it is clearly marking in times with their relationship with God and about being under the guidance, or in a New Testament term, being under the lordship of Christ, is the wise man, because that is true wisdom as per, or the fear of God, the way in which the wise man living in the culture, where the culture is a pluralistic, where the culture is compromising, but at that point of time, the godly man will be able to live as per the ways of God. Now that is a godly man, and he is wise, and his ways are characterized by wisdom. So these are things that we have to keep in mind as we are looking at the book of Proverbs. There are a lot of things that we can talk about this. I've divided this again into a couple of divisions for us to understand this better. The chapter 1, verses 1 to 7, associate it with Solomon, right? The opening verse associate the book of Proverbs with Solomon, who is considered as Israel's greatest man and the catalyst of Old Testament wisdom literature. Now, Solomon is not the full authority behind the text, because not every proverb comes from Solomon. And there are scholars who argue for Solomon as the compiler, or as the one who is the reason behind this, but there are also people who do not agree fully for Solomon. But that's not a primary interest for many of us. So we could take it as Solomon, we could take partial as Solomon, as many of us also take it. So here what we understand is the opening of the book shows the purpose of the book. The opening of the book is a clear marker of what is the compilation idea behind it. Now, why have they done this compiling of different proverbs, right? It is for wisdom, for gaining wisdom and instruction, for understanding the words of insight, for receiving instruction in prudent behavior, for doing what is right and just and fair, for giving prudence to those who are simple, knowledge and discretion to the young, Let the wise listen and add to their learning, and let the discerning get guidance. For understanding proverbs and parables, the saying and riddles of the wise. That means the instructions and the wisdom of these wise godly men who have lived before, or who are there, will, or the sages who are there, will definitely help the younger generation or the people who are living to keep their eyes focused on what really matters, and not be drifted away into things that really doesn't matter. So we have to understand that this particular writing is like serving as a guidance for all ages, for those who are aged, as those who are young. This book stands to be providing wisdom on godly living and godly how to bring up a person in the godly way of life. We have to understand that the book contains 7 collections of proverbs from various sources. So these 7 collections are quite clear, and we can see that in the writings. Wisdom and some opponents. So the first type is in chapter 1, verse 8 to chapter 9, verse 18. And here, much of the writing are devoted to sexual purity. Now, last week we had looked at the book of Song of Songs, and we clearly looked at the ways in which how there is a beauty in the sexual life that God has kept between in the covenant, or in the inside the wedlock. There's a beauty that God has kept into it, and we were able to grasp through those writings and see how God's intention, or what is a as per the ancient Hebrews, what is their understanding of this life. Now, here in this aspect, we have to understand that these materials are longer than the usual ones, and they are like a longer discourses. They are not really short ones, but they are longer discourses. And yeah, and they are elaborate in their sayings, and it looks like it is a series of these fatherly talks. So from 1:8 to 9:18, it is going to have this recurrence of the word my son, right? And this several reference is about a father's instruction and a mother's teaching that will actually guide a child in the righteous living, right? So there is the strong advice, a parental concern for the next generation is very clearly dictated, or how the Hebrews used to raise up their children is very clearly seen. And the instruction from the father and the teaching of the mother is well seen in these writing. It is amazing to actually study the writing of Proverbs. Just take one by one and study. It is going to be so amazing and so beautiful, because it contains so much of truth about life in itself. And if you're able to do that, it will be fantastic at some point of time. So as I mentioned, one of the aspect, a strong aspect, what they are actually teaching their next generation is sexual purity. Let me repeat what I said when I said Song of Songs, as some of you were not there. We are in at a time where people could openly find out wrong things by browsing or by looking at certain things. They will be able to gain the wisdom of the world so easily. So at a point like that, the generation that we are in, we have to educate our next generation in the right understanding of sexual purity, in the right understanding of what God's intention behind the gift of sex is, and all of those things. So just like how Song of Songs is dictating that, even in the writing of Proverbs, we are able to clearly see this instruction. We do not know who the father is, who the son is when they are writing this. However, this was strongly rooted in the culture, in the Jewish practices. So we are able to see that this is being addressed, and one of the strong aspect of that they are talking in light of wisdom is sexual purity, and that shows how important it is in the covenant. The second large session from chapter 10 to chapter 22, which is most likely most people's favorite sessions, comes mostly under these, right? These are concerned again as the Proverbs of Solomon, right? So this is much more about from in chapter 10 verse 1, there is this title that is given as the Proverbs of Solomon, and then there is a collections of discourses of individual proverbs. They are not really like how the earlier parental discourses are concerned. They are not really kept in an order of topic after topic, but it's more of it's a units which has consistently it consists of largely of a collection of proverbial and poetic sayings of two lines each. So they have really put it in that way so that they will be able to convey their message strongly. One of the example is, a wise child makes a glad father, but a foolish child is a mother's grief. Now, this is again, look at the wise and foolish, not in the now in today's world. When we ask who's a wise person and who's a foolish person, we might think, okay, this wise child is a doctor, and the foolish child is probably the one who doesn't have much marks and who ended up in some other profession. No, but biblically, a wise child is not really talking about the profession that he's involved in, but the wise child is living according to the ways of God, following the instruction in the law. And a foolish child, even if he is rich and he is possessed the Lord, he is actually living according to the ways of the world. So that's the contrast that we have to clearly see over here. So there are so many proverbs like this, and as I mentioned, taking each of these proverbs and looking at it and discussing over it and studying is really a good way of studying, because they have much to convey to us and to our daily living. And I would really encourage us to really study Proverbs and to understand that whenever we get an opportunity, even in our personal study, it would be really good. So then we have the sayings of the wise men from chapter 22:17 to 24:34, which is consisting of, so this is how the headings. So as I mentioned, these titles are involved in the manuscript. Many of our Bibles will have titles, and most of those titles are excluded from the text. Because many of them are added by the editors of those versions. An NIV might add a title, a KJV might add a title. However, in the Western literatures, many of them, these titles are involved inside the text itself. So here, these sayings of the wise, sayings of Solomon are in the text. And here it is the sayings of the wise in 22 to 24. And here it is about a student who should affix his art and pay close attention. So in more likely, when we look at these sayings, there are, when we look at these collections of Proverbs, we have to clearly understand that it is about having a very solid foundation in the truth and to trust in the Lord. Now, as I mentioned, these portion, chapter 22 to 24, known as, there are about 30 sayings in chapter 22, verse 20. They have much in common, which with an Egyptian document, which has the very same 30 chapters of instructions of well-being. Very similar, no much difference over there. So a lot of people argue that it is being, there are counter arguments. Some say it is the proverbial sayings that came first in the Hebrew culture, and then that was taken by Egypt. And some say the otherwise also. However, even though it has, or even if it has an origin in that way, we have nothing to worry, because this was carefully evaluated and taken up. And this is put up so that this is put up carefully by these wise men or these sages, so that we will be able to live in the way of the truth. Now, this is very foundational because the reason I mentioned is because a lot of these, I remember mentioning it when we did wisdom literature too. a lot of these proverbs doesn't come directly from the Hebrew people, doesn't come from, it is cultural in its way, but it is taken up and it is explained, or it is taught in the Hebrew understanding, in the ways of God, so that they will be able to understand better. Chapter 22, verse 17 and 18. Pay attention and turn your ear to the sayings of the wise. Apply your heart to what I teach, for it is pleasing when you keep them in your heart and have all of them ready on your lips. So again, right there, a lot of these proverbs, and even when we look at the poetic literatures, they are running back to the laws, right? Because law stands as a guiding force, and here they are reiterating the laws, so that that will help the people to live a righteous life before God. And then we have this 4 chapters of what we call as Proverbs from Hezekiah's collections. Now, Hezekiah did not pronounce these Proverbs. This was probably by Solomon, but it was compiled at the time of Hezekiah. And these were even there much before that, but these were probably compiled at the time of Hezekiah, because he might have been very fond of these Proverbs. In Second Chronicles chapter 29 to 31, we see the Hezekiah's various spiritual and political reformations, and many say that these proverbs have been a great interest to Hezekiah for his spiritual renewal, for him to understand various things on what leadership should be and how the leadership should be associated and all of these things. So many attribute these to Solomon, but the compiling took place at the time of Hezekiah. So these are Solomon's Proverbs, and they are marked by their short and forceful style. So just like how we saw in chapter 10 to 22, we are able to see a similar pattern in 25 to 29, the short and the forceful style of writing of Solomon. So Hezekiah scribes have collected them and made it into topical collections, so that the ones who are going to read it will be blessed by it, or they will be able to understand and live a godly life. And chapter 30 is the Proverbs of Agur. And here it is, they have existed much before they became part of this Proverbs. And it is a collection of repetition of numerical systems. So here is where the introduction of 3 things that are too amazing for me, 4 things that I don't understand, all these comes in chapter 30, and it is about a much more numerical in nature. Again, a very interesting chapter to look at. I was reading this a couple of times the last week as I prepared this. A very interesting chapter to look at. So here the chapter opens with the author's candid confession that he does not have great wisdom. In some ways, attributing to God that God is the ultimate wisest person, and showing that these wisdom flows from God, and the origination of true wisdom is God and not these people. So this confession has great values for those matters. And also his numerical statements demonstrate his need for more learning and insight. In some ways, they are showing out that he has lesser understanding and he needs more wisdom from God. So Agur's collection illustrates that pride is the enemy of wisdom and is therefore no friend of God. So as I mentioned, he probably would have started this saying that even though he's dictating a proverb, or a collection of proverbs, he is not wise to do this, or he is humbling before. Why? Because the intention of writing this is to show that pride is the enemy of wisdom. That means if you are not humble, you cannot learn more. And I think this is a real classic example of that should speak to all of us, because what happens, to be honest, is after some time of learning, after some time, maybe we get some opportunities to preach and so on, and we feel like, okay, we have got everything, God has anointed us and we can now go and preach and go and just give, but that is not really true. We need to keep learning, and there is so much in the in God's word. So there should be some form of learning all the time. We should be able to learn, and we should be able to study all the time, even as we give out. A lot of times, pastors and preachers have fallen because they have gotten so busy in life that they have forgotten to really prepare or stay with the word and understand and study. So that's one of the reasons why we have to understand that if we are too prideful, that we think that, okay, we have got it all, I don't need another person instructing me. The Holy Spirit is there, He will guide me in wisdom and in truth. And that is in a way saying that the Holy Spirit who has guided. Spurgeon is the one who said this. If you are going to neglect good godly resources that has been written by hundreds of men and women who were influenced by the Holy Spirit, and we say the Holy Spirit will directly speak to us, it is in a way this we are talking against the work of the Holy Spirit itself. So be a good learner all the time, be whenever God gives us opportunities, and be a good learner, learn at all the points of our time, and it will only help us to become better stewards of God's word, and better understanding of God as we go. And then we have the King Lemuel's Proverbs, which is learned from his mother, right? And it is much more about the royal responsibilities, or how the king has to be. Just 9 verses, but these verses again are profound. It talks clearly about the leadership responsibility, on how the king has to handle certain things, right? They should not indulge their appetites at the expense of the people. How should leadership be? Can leadership take advantage of the people who are under them? Absolutely not. Here, literally, this is talking at an age when kings used to loot their people, abuse the people with taxes, and abuse the people with various things, and people got fed up of living. Even we have to understand, even Solomon's and his next generations and all used to abuse people with taxes and various other things. So here is the sayings that are talking about true leadership, and how they have to serve people rather than living from them. So and then warns against drunkenness, and because drunkenness is an aspect that can lead to neglecting the law, and thereby what can happen is, when they are drunk, they're not being controlled by themselves, and they can actually persecute, and they can violate the oppressed because of all of these. So this is again a very strong sense of Proverbs that is talking about leadership. And the final one, and for a lot of people, this is a very dear section. It is about the finding an excellent wife, right? It is about the wisdom in finding an excellent life partner. Now, these are acrostic in nature, and that means each line of the letter. Now, I don't think we'll have time to look at Lamentations today, so we will not be able to see that. I probably in the next class we'll be looking at Lamentations. So what we understand that this is also after each, so it will start with one letter, and the next line the other letter, and so on. So here it is fitting that the book of Proverbs are ending with the understanding of finding a good wife. Now, look at it from the other side also. Now, there are women who are have to look at it from the other side and see about the understanding of finding a godly man, right? So here on one side, a good wife and a good husband, though it is emphasized here about a good wife. Another peculiar thing about this is in the arrangement of the Old Testament canon, not as per what we have in our English Bibles, but as per what we have in the Hebrew Bibles. Right after this comes the book of Ruth. And Ruth is actually picturized, or what they're trying to do in that order is where they are trying to picturize the Ruth to be the ideal or the excellent wife, a model wife, as what we are able to see over here. So this book has exalted the role of women and even personified wisdom as woman worthy of marriage. Now that is again a good aspect that we are able to see in Proverbs, where they have highlighted and exalted the role of women and personified wisdom in the understanding of women. So here, most likely talking to the young man who is beginning in service to God, can get his life rightly or become successful in his life, or he can ruin his life with the decision of the life partner that he is choosing. That means this is again, as we, I hope we remember the last session from the Song of Songs. Love is beautiful. The point of love is that it is so beautiful. It is experiential knowledge that we are getting in love. However, as love is strong, it can build us, it can destroy us. And here, in the same understanding, here love can, or the marriage relationship can help us to be successful, or the marriage relationship can destroy these young man's life. His service to God and service to people can be destroyed by the marriage partner that he has or she has. So his choice of a wife is the first test of his character, and his success depends on her character as well. That means the how they determine success is not based just on the magnificent work they are doing in the company of the wise around the table, by manifesting or telling great things of wisdom to people around, or talking great things or doing great things, but it is about the character also. So biblical wisdom is not about knowing so much and uttering so much and preaching so much alone, but it is also about how the character is shaped. Even in a marital relationship, the true wisdom of God shapes a person to be fit in for the marriage, to understand the marriage. Even as we learn from Paul, right? As I was reading these chapters, I could relate it with the message of Paul, because that's what Paul is trying to convey when he is talking about marriage. Because this is very important, because this can destroy a person. And I was talking to a friend today, and he was telling about somebody who actually destroyed her life because she chose a life partner who was not godly, looked godly, acted very godly in ministry wise, destroyed life because and I'm sure God will help her to come back into life, but have really destroyed life because of marriage choices. So what do we understand? Wisdom is not just about leading a country, because sometimes we will have the wisdom to lead a country, but if the family is a mess, there is no point in what we are doing or what we are telling. So Proverbs helps us to dictate meaning into every aspect of our life, in our leadership wise, in our family life, personally, to our children, to our next generation. All of these is well connected in the book of Proverbs. And that is why Proverbs has 31 chapters, and many people say read one chapter of Proverbs every day. I know that sometimes is not going to work, because understanding Proverbs, every verse, every book is, but at least some point of your life, take out time with some good commentaries, devote yourself to studying the book of Proverbs, and I aim to do that sometime, because it has deep truths and wonderful value systems that they are trying to convey in the book of Proverbs. My notes had so much more, but I limited myself in sharing this much because of our time constraint. So now coming to the book of Ecclesiastes. So this is again a book very debated, mainly for the authorship. But and now when I'm going to talk about this, I might not name a person who's the author, but and I will use a term that is used in the writing itself to talk about the person. So Ruth, Proverbs, Song of Songs are all positive books, or in terms talking about. So Proverbs, as I mentioned during the introduction, Zach Punin said that Proverbs is like the success story or the success values of a man, and Ecclesiastes is like the failed biography that he's writing, or autobiography of a failed man. And in some ways, it is true. Right here is the man who is looking back, right, showing life's problems and trying to tell the reader who is going to read this might misunderstand. He might think, why so much of negativity, right? Why so much of cluelessness? What has happened to this person? that he is telling that even Job is not, who has gone through such pain and terrible times, he's not telling this. But here is a person who went through all comfort and who got all the loves that existed everywhere in the world, who built houses and provinces in around the place at that point of time, is telling that everything is meaningless. Now, there is nothing to desire at all, nothing to love at all. What has happened to this man? So, in some ways, Sacktonen's understanding of that, when to look at it, is actually right. And in a way, it helps us to rethink where to prioritize in our life and where to give attention in our lives. Now, the book of Ecclesiastes, it reflects a time of despair. It really shows the sense of giving up. It kind of shows that action within us, that there is nothing relevant now. The promise of the covenant seems far distant. The glories of nation of Israel are forgotten, and the shining hope of the prophets are lost. That means, in terms of a political, in terms of a spiritual, no structure of reformation. Everything seems to have been broken and lost. And even in that desperation, he is trying to proclaim, or he is trying to discover the rich truth that is proclaimed in the other wisdom literatures, trying to bring those back, or the key aspect or the key truths of the fear of the Lord or living in the Lord is the only hope of that person. So Ecclesiastes, what they're trying to do here, the teacher is trying to teach that the only hope is to live a life in the fear and obedience to God. So that is what the book is all about. In simple ways, everything else is meaningless. Only a life that is lived for God has meaning and value in it. And understand again from the perspective of Solomon, the man who had conquered it all, feeling that he has lost it all because he probably have forgotten to fear God and obey the words of God. In KJV and NKJV, the word that is used for the teacher or is preacher, right? If you look at multiple times, the word preacher occurs. But the better version is in the newer translations like NIV, NLT, NRSV, and all, where they use the word teacher, right? Because the original word is kohelet, right? And kohelet or teacher is the right word. So what is actually written is Kohelet is the teacher who is going to teach these truths to the people, these wisdom to the people. So we have to understand that the Hebrew term occurs nowhere else in the Old Testament, only over here. So this term Kohelet occurs nowhere else. And so its meaning is not very sure, but it talks about a person who is a leader or a speaker in front of the assembly who is teaching them of the value or meaning. So what is the purpose, right? So the Kohelet's purpose is clear in the motto that is stated at the outset and repeated at the conclusion to form a literary envelope for the whole book. So there is in verse 1, chapter 1, verse 2, and chapter 12, verse 8, they are trying to form an envelope system over there where they have said, vanity of vanity, all is meaningless. Or in NIV, it is said, meaningless, meaningless, everything is meaningless. The Hebrew word term hebel or vanity has many different meanings attached to it. It can be frustration, it can be absurdity, it can be nonsense, emptiness, vapor. That means there is no value, there is no essence, there is nothing. It is all about emptiness that they are able to find over there. So Kohelet is warning a life that is caught in the pursuit of absurd and empty pleasures that have no lasting value. Now, at this point of time, it is very good to compare it with the life of Solomon and look at it. Because Solomon's life is a clear example of somebody who had everything, but somebody who did not have the true peace and the love that existed in the presence of God, because he was running behind conquering the world and he thought that was the wisdom. But what he lost is when he was looking for these absurd and empty pleasures, they have lost the lasting value of life. The simple message of Ecclesiastes is this: Life without God at the center is meaningless. It is just simply pointless. It has nothing to offer to us. If God is not at the center of our life, our life is meaningless and pointless, is what we can understand. The title and the theme, right? In chapter 1, verse 1 to 11, we can see that the books, what it is talking about, like meaningless, meaningless, all is meaningless. That is like the title, or that is like the emphasis of the book. So the vanity and meaninglessness in this book's motto are intense and all encompassing. That means everything, nothing in life has meaning in it. That's what the Kohelet is trying to tell his people. So, as the sun rises and sets, as the wind blows around and its endless discourses, so our labors are repetitious and futile in verses 5 and 6, right? That means everything they are doing work that is not has no meaning. Everything that they are trying to do has nothing new. And also, in some ways, when we look at it, it is addressing the human pride. It is talking that when we are pride filled about our own achievements and the developments, by the time when they were living in a culture, they have very developed from where they were. A community that were formed. Imagine God called them out from God called Abraham out, and then they wandered around the desert. And now, what they have come into a position is when other kingdoms look at it, now they have a king. Until now, they didn't have a king, and until then, they had nothing. And now they are formed as a nation. They have a capital to look up to, they have a temple that has been built. Everything looks like it's been developed, and everything looks better in the sight of men. However, here is a man who tells everything is meaningless and there is nothing new. That means everything existed from the time it all began, and there is nothing new under the sun. That means he is humbling humans over here, humbling them and telling them all what you did. Don't think that you are somebody great. All this existed from the past. From chapter 1 to chapter 4, it is taking Solomon as an example. That book is teaching us that even fame is no guarantee of a meaningful life. Taking Solomon as a very clear example, telling them that unlimited riches and resource that the great king had, the teacher is still searching for significance in life through Solomon's royal accomplishment. So here is a case study of keeping Solomon on one side, trying to see if this so-called wisest man in the land has anything to offer as a meaning to life, and his life is so messed up that there is no meaning out of it. That simply means achievements, wealth, or companionship, and the glory of rising from poverty to kingship. All of these are meaningless and has nothing to offer to us. Keep this in line with today's prosperity preachers and what are they preaching to us, right? They think that wealth is the guarantee of us being righteous in the sight of God, or health is us being righteous in the sight of God. When you started your walk with Christ, you might have had a bicycle or a cycle, and then God raised you up and you had a bike, and then you should have a car. And if these process, and then when you initially you were staying in a rented place, and then you had to move on to your own place. If this is not happening, where is the faithful God is the question that we all keep asking. But here, the Kohelet is clearly indicating this picture that the righteous person is not the one who is gaining wealth or companionship or rising from poverty to kingship, but it is truly about walking in sight of God and living in sight of God. All of these achievements of the world will one day fade away and have no meaning, and absolutely no meaning into it. And the book of these wisdom reflections should strongly hit our heads on what priority should we be given to certain aspect of life. So here the teacher is admonishing them, clearly telling them that the assessment of life activities, everything is meaningless. That means religion, wealth, all fail to add meaning to life. Now, religion means a system, not a relationship with God, a system that has nothing to offer to mankind. Now, if Christianity is going to remain as a religion, now there are some people say Christianity is only relationship, there's no religion. Now, I have a strong difference in that, because we strongly have, now when they say that, it is a loose fact of saying that anybody come all and we are all together. That understanding is also a little bit to be debated about. However, when you're only keeping it as a religion, there is no aspect, it is only becoming a system like that of Pharisees that is going to ruin faith and ruin the understanding of God. However, true relationship with God is what is missing over there, and that will only add meaning to life, unlike religion and wealth that will take away the meaning of life. So, so in chapter 8, 9 to 9, 10, they're talking about a common destiny that the righteous and the wicked. Now, I have been trying to emphasize these factors a lot these days. We think healing is for the righteous people, the holier people, and sickness is for the sinful people. That's not really true. Right? In a fallen world, the righteous and the unrighteous will be sick. Some righteous will be rich, will be wealthy. Some unrighteous will be wealthy. What are we focusing on? What should be our focal point? Our focal point is that the wealthy should not rely on their wealth. The healthy should not rely on their health. The popular ones should not remain on their popularity, but our trust should be on the Lord. Here, the teacher is lamenting that death is inevitable and we must all face that fact. Now, this is very true. Sometimes the reality that we try to forget is that one day we will all die. And that is the truth, right? Probably the greatest alarming factor of all of us is that one day we are all going to die. And what is the teacher telling us? The teacher telling us is that we must enjoy life, and we must enjoy him beyond the unanswered questions that we have. So that is what we could do, enjoy life with God and experience him more, even when there can be so many questions that we are troubled with. The conclusion to this book is amazing, right? In chapter 12, verse 9 to 14, there's a lot of things that they are telling. But finally, in 12, 13, the summarizing it of what is the Kohelet meaning when they are when he is trying to tell everything. He is telling that in the conclusion of this matter, that means your wealth is meaningless, your health is meaningless, your popularity is meaningless, religion is meaningless, everything is meaningless. But what has meaning? The meaning, what has meaning is to fear God and to keep his commandments. Again, going back to the law of God. Fearing God and keeping his commandments will add value to life, will add meaning to life. Meaning and significance in life are fleeting and may even seem impossible, but we are placed here to live in relationship with God regardless of our circumstances. Whether we are rich or poor, whether we are popular or not popular, whether we are accepted or not accepted, what should be the attitude that we carry is to fear God and to keep his commandment always. Let me conclude with this. Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verse 1. Remember your Creator in the days of your youth. Now, why should you remember? Sometimes we stop with that. We put a full stop over there when in the Bible it is a comma, right? Because the days of trouble come and the years approach when you will say, "I find no pleasures in them." This is a hard reality of life. And when we really look into each of our lives, right, we can really say, today we wish for something and we got it in our hand. Within few days or few months or few years, we are losing pleasure in that thing. Right? We do not even are able to enjoy that particular thing for more than a particular period of time. Now we are seeking for something better, or we are seeking for something greater. There is no satisfaction in in anything that this world can offer to us. At that point of time, here is an old man, Kohelet, a teacher who is standing at the end of his life, looking back to his life and telling these people, friends, live for God from the young days of your life. Defend the truth of God, because that is the only thing has meaning. Because he's saying that if there is anything to have a pleasure, throughout your life, not just at the end of your life, throughout your life, it is in being with the Creator. It is in experiencing our Creator and living our life with the Creator. So the emphasis of the call, the emphasis of the writer here is to remember our Creator. The true meaning of life, the true value of life comes by following God, by living for God and obeying His commandments. May God help us, each of us, to really follow Him, right? To follow the truth of His word, to understand Him more and experience Him in every walk of our life. Uh, Pastor, can I ask you to pray and conclude if you're there?